Hollywood, and Disney in particular, are sacrificing good story and character building for characters who simply tick a box on their inclusivity checklist. Let's listen to Master Samwise's slightly sarcastic but totally reasonable point of view on this subject.
Peter Pan and Wendy, The Rings of Power, Captain Marvel, The Last Jedi, Mulan. All products featuring a female lead of significant strength or power, all brutally panned by audiences. Why is that? Sexism, right? Or maybe it's just bad character writing. That's not to discount the awfulness of any actual hatred of female characters due to their gender, but it's quite apparent once you think about it that such hateful commentary only finds any significant audience if the wider, less spiteful viewing public dislikes the character for their own, more sensible reasons. The main reason, of course, is that so many lead women in film and TV in the past decade are just horribly written. There are plenty of exceptions, of course, and we'll talk about a few of those. This is a problem most notable in Disney projects, as you could tell from my list, but since Disney owns half the world at this point, it feels like a wider issue. So, what exactly makes these characters such bad examples of what a protagonist should be? Well, it's hard to point to any one thing in particular. Not all the characters discussed here will share the same writing flaws. They all fail in varying ways, but they do have some similarities. A common one is being overpowered and not really earning that power. The original animated film shows Mulan's struggle due to her inexperience and lack of physical prowess, but she makes up for those disadvantages by using her wits, thinking creatively, and refusing to quit even when things seem hopeless. The new Mulan is basically a superhero already due to her midichlorians, and thus is automatically more skilled than everyone else. There's no need for her to use her brain or develop new ways to approach problems, leaving the character flat and uninteresting.
Samwise makes a good point here. It might look good to new, woke viewers to have these characters on the screen, but the lack of character arc and story behind them pushes away established fans of the franchise.
It's worth noting that when I say earning power, that doesn't necessarily mean doing something noble or virtuous that results in the character being given great power, as is the case with someone like Captain America. Most superheroes do not earn their abilities in such a way. Their powers are forced upon them through chance or freak accident, and that's fine. However, to then earn the power given them, the hero should have to struggle in some way, to grow into his or her abilities. The Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie is a classic example of this. Peter Parker is given superpowers through a random spider bite, but he doesn't instantly know what to do with his newfound abilities, nor even how to put them to proper use. There are significant growing pains as he learns to be the hero he now must become. A more recent example of this trope that was done fairly well is Kate Bishop from The Hawkeye Show that at least 20 people watched. Despite being an incredibly talented archer and martial artist from the get-go, Kate is woefully inexperienced in the world of crime fighting and has to learn how to apply her skills in each new situation, relying on the mentorship of Hawkeye himself. On the flip side, we have characters like She-Hulk and Rey Skypatine. Rey's progression through her Jedi training was basically just whatever the plot required at any given moment. Jen Walters woke up as She-Hulk and immediately was in full control of her alter ego. The central struggles that defined the characters from whom these heroines were derived are just stripped away and not replaced by anything meaningful. Jen's defining character moment takes place during a group therapy session when she comes to the realization that she needs to accept that she doesn't need to be She-Hulk to find acceptance. That's right, the apex of Jen's character arc is her deciding that she can be herself. This wasn't an issue, by the way, until after the She-Hulk persona was present. Prior to her accident, Jen appeared to be quite satisfied with her life. For some unknown reason, she only decided to get into the dating scene after spending some time as a giant green monster, and then found out apparently there's no market for a reasonably attractive 30-something-year-old lawyer in Los Angeles. I don't know about you, but to me that feels a bit contrived. Look, I'm not in the online dating scene, but I have it on good authority that women tend to get significantly more attention than men do on those apps, especially if they happen to be successful and not ugly. Does this show seriously expect me to believe that the only guys willing to even talk to Jen Walters are total creeps and losers, or alternatively, men who are only charming and friendly because they have an agenda? Speaking of which, let's talk about Disney's obsession with promoting and elevating women. It's one thing to have female characters who are smart, strong, persistent, and courageous. It's quite another to simply promote the power of women by setting them up on a pedestal. That kind of treatment is nothing more than pandering, and stories that contain it suffer greatly.
I like what he says here. It's nothing more than pandering. The writers of these shows and movies don't care about anyone's opinion besides their woke audience. They are making these movies as a statement for their cause, not as a piece that can be appreciated by the fans of their characters and stories.
Take, for example, the recent Peter Pan and Wendy, which decided that the all male cast of Lost Boys wasn't inclusive enough, and so tossed some girls into the mix. Girls can be rough and tumble too, you hear? Do you know why the Lost Boys were originally all boys? It's because they fell out of their prams, or strollers for you Americans, and were carted off to Neverland. And girls are far too clever to do such a stupid thing. But apparently, no one involved in the casting decision had ever read the original novel, so here we are.
This is funny. The complete ignorance of the writers portrayed their girl Lost Boys as less intelligent in their attempts at inclusivity.
Or we could talk about Captain Marvel and the thinly veiled metaphor for the patriarchy embodied in the one dude who keeps telling her to not use her true power because that's cheating or whatever. And of course, She-Hulk seems to be mostly made just to complain about the pig-headedness of men.
There's a hot chick over there, I'm gonna go talk to it.
Yeah, nobody talks like that. It should come as no surprise that these shows and movies don't just fail at writing good female characters. They're terribly written across the board.
I'm the spy.
What?
It's not just Rey that the audience dislikes. No characters from the Disney trilogy won the hearts of the audience. Remember how great of a character Nick Fury was in Captain Marvel? Yeah, neither does anyone else. Elrond really stood out in the Rings of Power, right? Okay, he actually wasn't terrible. He wasn't good, but he could have been worse. Honestly, Galadriel could have been worse too. Not that I think she was well written, she wasn't, and her introduction in the first episode is basically a how-to course on annoying audiences. We first meet her as she's being tormented by other elf children for having the audacity to think that her origami swan will float. Not only does this display a severe lack of understanding of what elves are in Tolkien's Legendarium on the writer's part, it demonstrates a cheap trick that modern media likes to use in order to attempt to make the audience like a character: forced sympathy. The mantra goes something like this: look, this character is being mistreated, you must then feel bad for her and like her. The correct response to that is, of course, why is this character being mistreated? For all we know, Galadriel was being a complete twerp just moments before this scene, and is totally deserving of having her boat sunk. There's no narrative reason that the show gives for Galadriel to be tormented here. It's just an attempt at manipulating the audience into feeling bad for the poor, helpless victim, and thus hopefully liking her. Contrast that with Arcane and the plight of Vin and Powder. The show opens with an actually tragic scene, and it doesn't stoop to the pointed, petty tactics of Rings of Power. Galadriel lives in Valinor, a place of transcendent peace and harmony, so the writers contrived an inane attempt at sympathy. Arcane is set largely in a brutal slum of a city, but it gives its main character a plucky, relentless attitude that rejects the victimhood status which so many other modern properties confer upon their heroines. Because if you're a victim, how can anyone hate you? Well, it's pretty easy when you're incredibly smug and don't give a rat's ass about the safety of your troops. The me against the world vibes from Galadriel in the first episode are just so tired and overdone. We know she's going to be right about Sauron still being around because of course she is. She can take down the Ice Troll single-handedly because of course she can. However, that on its own would not necessarily be bad writing. Galadriel, because that is what the show calls her, is quite old and thus an experienced warrior. I'm willing to accept that this character has spent centuries in combat and thus is highly skilled and capable of such feats. What makes this scene so absurd is that all the other elves around her, these warriors hand-picked to exterminate Sauron and the remnants of his armies, are completely and totally hapless and helpless to the point that they might as well be a different species than their leader. It's totally fine to have protagonists who are supremely skilled, but it's a really poor choice to have the supporting characters be complete buffoons in order to showcase that skill. Galadriel might as well just be out there on her own. Really, most of the examples I've listed tend to just do things solo. It is up to them and them alone to win the day. As in Captain Marvel and Mulan, all they really need to do is seize the power that is already within them, to throw off the shackles others would impose upon them, and victory is theirs. The dramatic shift between victimhood and total power is what these movies believe to be meaningful character work, but it's really just a violent swing from one extreme to the other, and neither end of the spectrum is healthy. There's a huge difference between having agency and being world-conquering forces of nature that only needed to shrug off the hands holding them down. If you're going to write the hero of a story, a central character who ultimately is able to conquer the evil he or she faces, you need to make them earn it. that protagonist needs to struggle or even suffer as they obtain the strength necessary to win the day. Ideally, they would find such strength through meaningful relationships or by learning from those wiser or more experienced than them. Recent examples of this done at least fairly well: Rita Vertasky, a supremely skilled soldier having to work together with Tom Cruise's character, whose name I forget, to gradually establish a plan to win the war. Vi being motivated by love for her sister, relying on others in her fight, badly missing the guidance of her father figure. Kate Bishop being mentored by Hawkeye as she realizes how ill-prepared she is for the world she has stumbled into. There are plenty of other examples of female protagonists who match that description, but I wanted to point out some from within the last decade to emphasize the point that audiences do not, by and large, just hate any strong woman on screen right now, just the ones whose character arcs are flatter than the state of Kansas. Characters who need only achieve self-actualization are not only boring and lack meaningful character work, they teach us awful lessons. The idea that all that is needed for success is to seize the strength and power already within you is a harmful notion that discredits the value of relationships, personal growth, and humility. You are sufficient, these stories tell their audiences. You don't need to change. Our heroes are supposed to inspire us, either by their ability to grow beyond their own flaws and failures, or, despite being paragons of virtue and goodness, still having to struggle against overwhelming odds and having to use their wits to be creative, to trust their team to win the day. Indeed, some of the most admirable characters in fiction, ones who do not suffer all that much personal growth due to having already attained great virtue, find themselves insufficient. This is most clear in Tolkien's work, where characters such as Faramir, Theoden, and Aragorn, great men who suffer little if any inner turmoil, at least in the books, are not able to win the day, but rather can only play their part in the war that will define the future of Middle-earth. They teach us the message we need to hear, the message that Disney and Hollywood want to keep from our ears, and that is, you are not enough, but you still can do great things. They may not bring you glory, they may even bring you pain and suffering, but if you put the good of others before your own needs and wants, you will find true and lasting happiness. So many modern heroines fail to win the love of the audience because they take shortcuts to power. They are elevated by the story rather than having to climb up their own character arc. They are shallow character molds created largely to prove a point or push an agenda, and perhaps most importantly, they tend to care for themselves, their own success, their own ideas of what it means to be fulfilled. Hollywood and Disney in particular seem to want so badly to provide us with examples of powerful women, but they fail to understand what makes for a good example or role model. The heroines they prop up are too often shallow, unlikable, and exhibit many of the traits, such as arrogance and abrasiveness, that their creators find abhorrent in male protagonists. How is this fixed? Simple. Create characters to tell a story, not to prove a point.
Create characters to tell a story, not to prove a point. I love that line. It's such a simple solution. Let's hope that Hollywood sees the reaction of the true fans of their franchises and listens to their opinions.
Either show flawed characters who have to grow and change to heal their inner wounds and overcome their shortcomings, or give us paragons of virtue who have to struggle, sacrifice, and suffer due to the evil they face. But most importantly, write characters whose defining moments do not come as they realize their own worth and value, that they themselves are sufficient, but rather as they decide to take selfless action for the good of others.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
So what do you guys think about this subject? Is it okay for Hollywood to sacrifice their time-tested and proven characters to simply appeal to a small minority of viewers? Will it hurt or help them in the long run? Let's hear your opinions in the comments. Thank you for watching.